Welcome, everyone, to our very special episode talking about the Tournament of Champions as it's come and gone over these last 20 years. I'm one of your hosts, East Coast Samuel.
I'm the other host, Legend Done One on PokerStars. And
Yeah.
so, and so, Sam, you are a writer, but I understand that you told me that there was another endeavor you're getting yourself into recently.
Yep, it's called The Public Intellectual. It's a punk rock band here in Boston, Massachusetts. We've got a guitarist, we've got a bass player lined up, a drummer, and then I'll be writing some lyrics for them.
No one should buy your books or your CDs because you're a punk. Danman, what a great song about that was from Danman. So the Tournament of Champions, it's kind of funny. The '04 World Series of Poker broadcast, during the main event, they would sort of really amp up the expectations for this supposed Tournament of Champions. It was a unique event that began in '04. It was kind of a free roll, invitational only tournament back in '04 at least, where they kind of just picked 10 of the top names. I'm sure that there could be debate if it was the 10 biggest names of the time, but 10 of the most relevant and biggest names of the time, playing for $2 million for first place in a winner take all situation. We did discuss this a bit with Greg Raymer a year and a half ago. We mentioned how he didn't think any deals were struck because they kind of put a kibosh on the idea of they all take 100K each and then play for a million or something like that. Which when it's a free roll, I think the ethics and morals about that are a little bit questionable. So I understand why maybe they did that. And so we had, a star-studded table that I, was a fan of at the time watching this 20 years ago as a, 12-year-old kid that summer, and I was, it's a it kind of aired in like a 3-ish hour block, sort of 3 episodes worth. And so I had seen this 20 years ago, and it was again fun for me to kind of see how it holds up 20 years later. How about you?
Yeah, I'd seen some clips from it. Obviously, I would have been a very small kid at the time, so I don't really remember watching it. Yeah, I mean, they tried to hype this up during the broadcast as though this is kind of like an all-star game in the NFL or in the NBA or something. Again, you do have a pretty good row of players here. You've got, you have Greg Raymer, you have Chip Reese, you have Johnny Chan, you have Daniel Negreanu, you have Andy Duke. You have, a pretty good row of players here, different styles, different backgrounds of the game, some newer players, some older players. So, I mean, yeah, I can understand why they would want to do something like this. O3 was a big success in the ratings department. Obviously, all these people have become famous and they invested a lot in '04, had a lot of bracelet events broadcasts, events that aren't huge nowadays or even back then. So it makes sense they would kind of, cap off their season by having something like this, really more like a TV special than anything else. Obviously, $2 million up top, but that was it. It was top heavy. Only first place got paid. No bracelet, a nice little trophy for the winner. But beside that, it was really just kind of bragging rights, $2 million, saying that you could, be the champion of champions, so to speak. And obviously, as we go through these, you'll notice that the rules and conventions of the Tournament of Champions changes quite a bit, to the point that you can kind of, it's debatable which ones are quite all-star seasons and which ones aren't. But I'm willing to just say, overall that this is sort of a good group of players, and especially in '04, a group of really entertaining players. And you could tell the editors and producers were invested in it, filming segments, having interviews, and just also letting the conversation go at the table, which is always nice.
Yeah, there are a total of 5 iterations of this tournament, and each one sort of has a different goal in mind. And ironically, the '04 and '05 to also the same extent kind of function as like a half clip show season finale special, cap to that broadcast season, which is exemplified by the top 10 moments countdown that is in between hands in both of those two broadcasts. But this tournament would be in '04, '05, '06, would take a 4-year gap until 2010, and then it actually came back in 2022 as a bracelet event. So again, we'll get to those differences as we go along. But again, in this case here, this was a pretty straightforward. We invited top 10 players to play. The three, most of the most bracelets at the time, they were tied for 9 at this point. Doyle, Johnny Chan, and Phil Hellmuth. And then you had the player of the year, you had the world main event winner, you had kind of like the top, sibling duo in poker at the time. And then obviously Ivy, considered one of the best all-around players, and Gina Cloutier, whose accomplishments, were still at that time 20 years ago, up there as far as top finishes in the main event along with bracelet wins. So again, and also of course Chip Reese is considered one of the greatest cash game players of all time. So you kind of had a different category of top player represented in this field, and so I appreciated that. And one thing I did kind of like was also this kind of like unique music that they used for the TOC that's
Yep.
used in 04, 05, 06. It's kind of like this and it would play after or before every commercial break, more or less. And so it kind of was like if you were blind and you were only hearing like the soundtrack of a broadcast of the WSOP, that would be how you could tell that's the Tournament of Champions. And so in this case, they each get $200,000 in chips. Again, you can kind of conflict that to it being a 200K free roll if you divide the price by the number of players. The blinds are 1K and 2K to start. They use similar chips to the main event that year. Those like yellow, black, those like dark like black and yellow, like they flip the ratio of the yellow and the black and the two chips. And we don't know what the structure as far as how long each level is, but the blinds they cover quite a few blind levels and they get pretty short before any bust outs really take place. So again, back to our Rainbow interview, he mentioned how at one point he was defined as like the surprise chip leader because so much action had been skipped, we didn't really see him accumulate chips. And that's definitely present here, in which case there's a pretty sizable jump between where in the action we're watching one hand, and then we'll maybe fast forward 2 or 3 levels later before we actually get to some more action there. So it didn't affect the quality of the broadcast by any means, but it's just interesting because when you're playing, it's all for first, so it does kind of change your tournament or sit and go table mentality of how you approach a hand before you play.
Yeah, I mean, we have our first bust out Chip Reese pretty far into episode 1. They had been commenting that the action was pretty tight. At one point, they show the leadership board, and Hellmuth is in the lead with 345K, but everybody else is pretty much about equal around 200K. So they were definitely playing tight, it seems, if you sort of look through the editing logic. And then in terms of how it's edited, I mean, it's there are quite a few hands that are shown in each of these episodes. This was about a 2-hour documentary that they split into 3 episodes. But there's also a lot of segments of a lot of different things, like each player picking somebody to win. Phil Hellmuth, of course, says that he's going to win. People sort of talking about Greg Raymer and how he was as a player. There's quite a lot of Raymer footage throughout this, and also just sort of standard interview segments where the classic set of them sitting at the poker table with chips in their hand, which again is sort of my favorite sets for any of the WSOP coverage we've looked at. It looks like a real poker table. It looks like a real environment, and it just looks right for it. But Chip Reese talking about how he's very well known as a cash game player, plays at the big game a lot, but he has to play a lot of tournaments. Just kind of again interesting, different styles of poker. That you have cash game heavy players who have to play tournaments for the first time. I mean, there's quite a few interesting sort of moments and quotes. I mean, I mentioned in the past and sort of more recent main events how a lot of these episodes wouldn't even get a page of notes from me. Each of these episodes in 04 got well over a page of notes, just so many different lines, so many different moments, in addition to some pretty interesting poker hands.
Yeah, and maybe the only sort of like little first world problem issue I had with these episodes was that some of the memorable moments weren't really like moments. They're more just like
Mm-hmm.
several moments and like just kind of vaguely called a moment. So like I would say a moment is like one hand or like one speech or like not like winning a tournament isn't really a moment. Like the hand they win the tournament is the moment. So if the final hand is very intense, I'll give them that. But if it's just like, oh, player so and so won this bracelet, so that's not really a moment unless there's a particular sound bit or clip from that entire event that was worth mentioning. And so, for example, moment number 8 was Gavin Griffin busting Hellmuth to become the greatest, to become the youngest bracelet winner ever. And again, that for me, that's not really a moment. That's kind of 2 things in one. And again, it's not really any big deal, but it's just again moments. I think they should have said like maybe like top stories or something just to make it a bit more exact.
Yeah, and I'm surprised that Raymer versus Matusow came in at number 10, right at the back end of the countdown. You'd think it would be higher up. Though I do like there's one little editing trick they did. They spliced the hand where Raymer turns a flush on Matusow with when Matusow busted out. So when Matusow goes, no, no, and bounces away, they spliced it in and make it seem like that was his reaction to the hand when that was 2 different hands. I thought that was kind of clever. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you there. Like number 9 was Doyle getting 53rd in the main event, which like, okay, that's nice. But is that really a moment? I don't really. That's like
Yeah.
just Doyle gets his due. That's not really a big deal.
And one thing you mentioned, number 10 with Mass. Remember, I liked that they actually had brand new interview content with Raymer discussing that entire situation that was not within the episode. So that again, I like that they went to the effort to put a little bit more of new stuff into this because a clip show could have been really boring if it had been exactly the same, like an abridged, just like 30 seconds from the episode from that was of, but instead we have some new stuff mixed in there to keep things a little bit fresh.
Hmm.
Otherwise, pretty often one of these sort of side bits would also be maybe having the table discuss one player in particular, their accomplishments, their how to play against them at the TOC, things like that. I like that a little bit. And then we also had a brief little looking ahead to the '05 main event where they'd be switching from for the casino to the Rio, which they were at for almost 20 years. After that, change of venue. So I liked how that it was sort of, again, as we're wrapping up '04, we're looking ahead towards '05. And so that's a good little sort of history setting for this broadcast. Otherwise, the actual poker action, I don't think is anything too crazy. I mean, Negreanu plays a lot of his sort of suited connector cards, which was really the only kind of gameplay that really kind of jumped out at me as anything special or unique. Everybody else, the hands for the most part kind of play themselves. I mean, the episode one we begin with 10 players, we end episode with 8 with Raymer as a chip leader, and with the blinds kind of small in those early few hands, the action doesn't mean too much. Although I did like how the very first hand was the 3 9-time bracelet winners playing in the same hand. That was kind of cool. It's pretty much the only time that ever happened, so it's kind of cool to have that happen here.
Yeah, I mean the action. It's a lot of premium hands, like I mentioned. A lot of people were playing tight. Aces, kings, queens, that sort of thing. What I like about the hands is, again, just the banter amongst the players. And probably my favorite banter in all this episode is just Doyle Brunson doing this passive aggressive, making fun of Phil Hellmuth for jumping out of his seat, talking in the middle of a hand, complaining about everything, which, like, Doyle just, again, like, you don't think of Doyle as a super talkative player, but just as like just passive aggressive, like, I'm the father of the table, you need to calm down attitude is just great.
And he also complains about Hellmuth's slow play as far as
Right.
pre-flop, looking at his cards, thinking and stuff. And Hellmuth tries to defend, like, I don't think I put that slow. And again, it's kind of funny. It's a little bit of recency bias. Like if you can play so fast for hours, and if you're slow on one hand, they'll rip you a new one. So again, we're not seeing exactly how long he was taking, but again, I trust Daryl's judgment that if he was playing a little bit slowly, then I defer to him in that situation. And again, Hellmuth is arguably with Duke, kind of the two main. I mean, in the final two, so it's a little bit of a cheat to say, but Hellmuth gets the most sort of like vocalizations and antics of the table, and Duke kind of has this. She's down early in chips and then kind of fights her way back to get in the swing of things before going on a late surge to take things down. But I besides my little nitpicks here and there, I did think this was a good start to the final table, and pacing considerably ramps up in episode 2, where we go from 8 players down to 4.
Yeah, and again, like I mentioned, a lot of sort of, again, there are plenty of poker hands in here, but there's also just a lot of segments, Ivy playing golf with Howard Lederer. And it's kind of just nice to see Ivy in a different environment, like a little bit more smiley, a little bit more relaxed, because he's usually pretty reticent at the table, which is totally fine. But it's just kind of nice to see him doing like that. Negreanu also having like a segment about him winning a car for being player of the year, and WSOP 04 is his license plate. Just a lot of segments where you get like a little bit more about their personality. There's a little bit more frivolity here, a little bit more meat on it, instead of just, I'm a poker player and this is what I do, which is, I think, really nice.
And also, not mention, we get Doyle Brunson with a great interview bit about his poker origins and fighting cancer and seeing his office, just seeing where he lives. I mean, again, these are players we care about, so it's good to see a little bit more about them. Compared to those other like '04, '05 Final Tale broadcasts where you have like 8 random Joes and maybe one player you might know. And it's just nice to have everyone that we want to learn more about and appreciate their play and their personas both on and off the field.
Yeah, absolutely.
As far as a couple other of the moments in this episode, as far as top 10, we have the infamous Joe Awada losing to Scott Fishman on a bad beat. That is a moment for me. That's like that a single hand, and then of course Scott Fishman going back to back is a separate moment. So I like that they distinguish between one thing and another, which they didn't do with on the episode prior with Phil Hellmuth busting to Gavin. Otherwise, this episode, again, with only 2 million chips in play, these stacks are getting relatively short pretty quickly in this episode. So there's a little bit less of flashy play. It's mostly just kind of, ace runs into bigger ace all in, or, pair against overpair, or, flip, which is not bad. I mean, I do care about these players, and so it's not like it's just, kind of random action, like say, Poker Superstars Invitational, where they have 5 blinds and are just going all in on the first hand or something like that. And again, we get, Raymer is, fairly, in the chip lead, but not like an overwhelming like 04 or Jamie Gold, chip lead. But a chip lead is still, you can't win unless you're chip leader at some point, right?
Yeah.
But with the actual poker action, again, I didn't think anything jumped out at me as like a super amazing, awesome hand. But the ending of this episode does remind me again of our Raymer interview, where we discussed how the booth kind of tore him a new one for like blowing up towards the end. And really, again, I couldn't disagree more. I think looking at from a modern poker standpoint, Raymer's plays were not only justifiable but also the right move at those times.
Yeah, I mean, going over it, he raises with 9-8 suited, and Andy Duke shoves with ace 10, and then Raymer calls. I mean, yeah, that's not an optimal play, but it's not a terrible play either, given their stack sizes. 9-8's still a totally playable hand against a hand like ace 10. You still can hit plenty of flops. And then afterward, Duke obviously doubles up, and then Raymer shoved with 9-10, and then Duke called with pocket eights. I mean, you're flipping there. That's not really a big deal. I don't think that last hand either. Again, 9-10 isn't an optimal hand, but it's totally fine. I mean, I think Raymer played totally well throughout this tournament. He finished in 5th place. He seemed to get quite a bit of respect from the people at the table. So I don't really see what the problem is.
Yeah, and again, even the action up until that point, the blinds that by the end were 12K, 24K, and remember putting like a 2.5x raise until there's only so much, more he has to call and he only has to have so much equity to really make it a correct call. And so again, I'm fine with how he played it. It didn't feel like he blew it or anything. And again, he's going for the win. You have to go for the win. It's winner take all.
Right,
So you can't
exactly.
just sit there and fold down into a few big blinds. You need to accumulate chips here, especially when you're playing against such good players. You can't just sit there and hope that you're going to get aces against their kings. It doesn't happen. Otherwise, some of the other, bits, Lederer talks about his 04 main event, his big bust to Doyle in the main event with a set against flush draw. And again, that was also, it wasn't a moment in the top 10, but it definitely was, one of the bigger moments of that main event when you're looking at the top pros, gameplay at that time. We do also have a pretty amusing interview about Johnny Chan and the origin of his orange sniffing, which again, everyone in the table kind of gets one or two pretty meaty interviews about them that had some detail that I really appreciate. So again, this is a great example of why these interview side bits are so much fun that we really didn't get as the main event would go on years later.
Yeah, I think my two favorite moments would be toward the end of the episode. They showed a little quick footage of Greg Merrimer watching the coverage of the
Yeah.
04 main event. He starts crying. Like, I thought that was a really nice moment. And then there was the segment right before then, which is Phil Hellmuth watching footage of himself and commenting about himself, and kind of going back and forth with Norm. Like, Norm would make a snarky remark. He'd be like, "Oh, you nailed me there. He's not really that nice to me," things like that, which I thought was really funny. And again, it's not something that you really see in the coverage nowadays. Like, the closest I can think to kind of like a goofy segment like this would be when they had all of the final tablists hold the bracelet. Like, that's the closest I can think of to something like a little bit more character driven, not just, oh, my dad works as a plumber and I really like playing poker, and here's my daughter and back to the main event. Like, something which actually shows their personality and a sense of humor. And again, I just love Phil Hellmuth. Just, you can't quite tell if he's playing a character or not. It's like Andy Kaufman, which I really like. It's like, is he exaggerating his personality? Is he self-aware? And just segments like that just dance on the line perfectly for me, which I really
It's
like.
kind of funny how in the 03 to 06 era of the main event, like these clips of Hellmuth watching himself, he'll like watch himself, and then he'll like the number of nesting dolls in
Yeah.
this is pretty funny. I mean, they reuse a lot of those footage year to year, but this is again just in the middle of that era of when they would do those bits where he's watching himself and try and say, "Oh, I'm a better person this year" or whatever. So again, it's kind of fun to watch that. And the ratio of like hands shown and interview or side bits is pretty well balanced. Like, I think some people might complain that there was too much filler, so to speak, but I think for this sort of like ending the season and this is all the champions and we're counting down, so I think that the balance totally was fine, and I like that they took a chance and had a fairly even split for this content.
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, it's kind of like a season finale for the '04 main event or the '04 WSOP, really. So it's kind of nice that, again, you have all these players that everybody likes. You kind of go back through the '04 WSOP, even if, the moments aren't exactly great. But, it's nice in spirit that they're doing something like that. It is a good sort of mix of moments since, they are kind of entertaining, seeing Men the Master win, spilling his beer on people. Like, that's kind of funny. And then you have some interesting poker action with an interesting structure being so top heavy with a lot of moments of just the players bantering with each other and having these fun segments. I think it's a good mix of things.
Yeah, and things come up to a fairly good conclusion with episode 3, which is actually only 36 minutes long, so
Mhm.
a little bit shorter than the first two parts, where we're playing the final four down to one, where Chan goes out in fourth place fairly early, and then Howard Lederer gets kind of bullied by his sister a few times in three-handed play before shoving pocket sevens and busting to Annie Duke, making a set of sixes with or pocket sixes, and he's pretty upset. But you have to imagine that she wants to win, and they make it very clear in some of the interviews that they're not holding anything back. They're going for the win, but obviously, Annie, if she obviously thinks that if she can't win it, she wants her brother to win it, the $2 million, because Hellmuth is Hellmuth. But I understand why she would be upset after busting him. And we actually have a fairly lengthy heads-up battle, about 20-ish minutes of action, six hands, which is pretty sizable back in '04 for a heads-up match to stretch in the episode. And that their chip stacks are also fairly even when heads-up began too.
Yeah, and there are some very exciting moments. They both hit trips, and then Hellmuth shoves all in, pushing over his chips as he does so. It goes back and forth. And again, if you didn't know that Annie Duke won it, you wouldn't really know based off of the edit. It seems fairly even until you get to the very last hand. And Phil Hellmuth, I mean, how you'd even describe meltdown, blow up. Just, I mean, this has been in Phil Hellmuth compilation videos for a while. I remember seeing this footage when I was younger, so to finally see the full context for it, the previous segment, Phil's talking about, I'm 10 times blessed and I'm trying to change myself and great things happen to me. And then you just get to hear it's just a perfect sort of setup for this entire ending and a just kind of rare in the way it's shot that a camera crew is following him into these like back rooms or whatever, and they're all dark and he's just like walking around mumbling to himself. It's very interesting.
Yeah, and it's interesting because Hellmuth, I was a Hellmuth fan at age 12 when I watched this. I didn't know when I first started, I did not know who was going to win. So I was rooting for Hellmuth because I was rooting for him just from before, and I was definitely kind of annoyed at his behavior. Like, can you just be graceful and defeat man just once? I mean, I was back then kind of irked by him. And it's kind of funny. He actually says during his rant after he loses, she raised me 6 times. There's no way she had me all 6 times. And that's how many hands they showed heads up. So even though that wasn't those 6 times weren't those 6 hands he's referring to. It's just kind of funny to have the symmetry there of 6 being the number of hands. And it's there's a little bit of an end montage, kind of like to tie things up, kind of, which is kind of cool. But I want to discuss the bits in this episode too, because it's actually a kind of a cute bit where Duke and Lederer play War, Trouble, Battleship, just for the cameras for funsies. It's kind of funny to see siblings that are adults play those kind of kiddie games. And he also mentions that he's never knocked her out, but she's knocked him out a few times in a poker event. So it's kind of funny that he's kind of a one-sided rivalry, and that continues into '04 here in the TOC. And then the probably the biggest letdown of this collection might just be the selection of the number one moment of 2004, which is the youth wave of success, which again isn't a moment. I mean, you had Scott Fishman winning a youngster, you had Gavin Griffin winning young. So this is it kind of repeats, and it's number one. Like, really, like you couldn't just pick like even just Raymer winning it all or something or something like that. I don't know. It's a bit of a letdown.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially because number two was the famous he called me with Jack high hand, which I think counts, and that's like a funny moment. I'm not sure if it would be number two. I mean, I'm okay with it like being number five, but number two is a little weird.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, these moments clearly were just kind of there to fill in time, commemorate the '04 WSOP, just tie into the people who were at the table. I mean, moment number three was just Annie winning her first bracelet, which I think was only included because Annie was still in episode 3 and they needed to have more footage of her or something.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I mean, again, it's not a huge deal. We're not complaining too much. I thought, the montage at the very end commemorating the '04 WSOP was unnecessary, but I thought, it's fine. It's nothing too offensive. I kind of like the song that was played over it. I get to hear a little bit more of it in future episodes. Yeah, I mean, overall, I think, this is a very sort of strong, unique couple of episodes. I mean, I know it's kind of weird. It's like this really is a 2 hour special, and then PokerGo kind of just chopped it up into 3 episodes and put it online. Um, but I think this is very strong and very unique that this is kind of just has this mid 2000s vibe. The poker boom is underway. It's very exciting. Howard Lederer hasn't done any of his suspicious stuff yet. Um,
Mhm.
it's not saying anything, but
Yeah,
he's settled.
yeah.
So yeah, I mean, there's just a nice spirit here. Everybody is, I think, having fun for the most part. Maybe not Phil Hellmuth, but it's really enjoyable content.
Yeah, again, I don't think it's quite at the level of what the one drop, which again is similar in the sense that we kind of know each player in the field more or less, but
Hmm.
it's still, this was an event that they didn't have to make. This
Right.
was made for the purpose of TV, and you figure, some TV shows have $1 million for top prize, so for 3 hours of content for TV, that's 2 million is the main budget of the prize pool and whatnot. Things changed a little bit up in '05 though with the Tournament of Champions played in fall of '05. So this is after the main poker season. And this is also played in a new location, Caesar's Palace, rather than the Rio or the Binions running thing. And rather than having only 10 players here, we have a bit more of an expanded player pool. We have 114 players in total, but this includes of the following: the '05 final tablists, anyone who won a bracelet in '05, various '05 circuit qualifiers. You didn't have to win an event, but you said to get a certain enough points to qualify, and then 3 Pepsi sponsored players, which the nature of these sponsored, players is a point of controversy for some because the players that qualified legitimately, they want to have obviously as few players as possible, playing. But in this case, they wanted to have again Johnny Chan, Bill Brunson, and Hellmuth in there. They had all won bracelets, 10, number 10 that year or whatnot, or I think maybe still at 9 or something like that. But they, were increasing their total, and they wanted to have some name brand players in there to keep things spicy. And so, with that in place, again being a 3-day event, we actually don't cut into the action until day 2 when episode 1 begins.
Yeah, we have 28 out of 114 people left, which is kind of unfortunate. I mean, I would have liked to have seen a little bit more footage from day one. I mean, you're already going to allocate 3 episodes for this. Why not have a fourth episode which covers day one at a minimum? I would have liked to have seen maybe a little bit more of that. Yeah, I'm totally fine with, having the 9 final tablists, having bracelet winners, having sponsorships for other people. Again, this feels more like a tournament of champions than the previous one, which really isn't a tournament. It's a cash game with 10 people, right? This isn't actually something 114 people that you have to fight through. But really, of these 28 people, like this is the Mike Matusow show from start to finish. Yes, Phil Hellmuth gets quite a bit of coverage. Yes, Steve Damon gets quite a bit of coverage, and we'll get into that in a moment. But this is like from the very beginning, it's on Mike. Obviously, goes all the way to the end. This was really like his 3 episodes to just sink his teeth in and be Mike Matusow.
Yeah, I agree. And again, by virtue of having this being on day 2, we have a couple of tables remaining. And with the prize pool, we should mention there's a $2 million prize pool once again, but in this
Mhm.
time, 1 million's for first place, and then the top 9 will cash. And so the pay jumps for these TOCs are actually kind of weird. We'll get into them in a little bit for each one, but
Mhm.
at least $1 million is pretty meaty. It was the ninth place prize in the main event that year that Minnesota took place. And so, it's still, it's just not going to free roll. So then it's free money. And again, it's kind of one of those incentives to play as many events as possible. Because if you win one, with certain perks come with it. So I'm sure that enticed many amateurs to try to, get lucky once so they get lucky twice. With episode 1, Hellmuth is the chip leader at the main TV table. We get, we don't know all these players, but we know a good chunk of them, so it's not too much of a wash. And again, a few of these players we know just from their main event final table that year, and a few we know from them being top name brand players. Um, and right at the top of the episode, it's kind of funny. We see as much of Daniel Bergstorf in the Tournament of Champions as we see in the '05 main event because he busts in on the first hand shown, and that's pretty much what his edit was in '05 and during the main event. And so that just kind of made me laugh, even if it wasn't really too big a footnote in the episode.
Yeah, and Aaron Cantor, not the Dragon Slayer, the Giant Slayer, kind of has an opposite treatment where he just keeps kind of playing these weird hands, 6-5, 9-7, and in his main event run, he just kept rivering people out of the tournament. He just keeps missing with these suboptimal hands. So it's kind of funny to see, Bergsdorf kind of leave just like he did in the main event, and then have Aaron Cantor as the exact opposite treatment during it. And obviously we have Steve Daneman. Unfortunately, we don't get any of the other main event final tablists. I'd be kind of curious, like, how did Tex Barch do? Did he get, how is he doing as a player, things like that. But fortunately, just these guys.
Yeah, I kind of felt that episode 1 was probably the weakest by a fair margin of these three for '05. But there's still a few things I appreciate. I mean, we get to see a little bit of Steve Damon, his life after getting second place in the main event, moving up in his home game as far as how good a player he is, that old line. We see moment number 10 is Doyle and Johnny Chan winning their 10th bracelet. And I guess even though it's two moments, I guess I'm okay because it is number 10 for two of them for number 10. So that kind of works for me, I suppose. And then we get a little bit of Hellmuth discussing getting second place in the TOC the year prior. And again, second place in a star-studded event is still pretty good. Obviously, it's not any money, but his rants from after he lost second, third, no money. I mean, he does kind of back up his game a bit more in '05. He plays pretty solid in this tournament and does pretty well. So, he gets a little bit finds a smidget of redemption, I suppose, but maybe not as much as Matusow might be getting.
Yeah, Matusow, again, as I mentioned, this is Matusow's show, and just he is in peak form here, just jousting with Phil, calling him a has-been, talking about playing tight and saying, is Phil Hellmuth at this table, talking about the cameras on Phil, and also with Steve Daneman saying that Steve Daneman ruined his life, so he's going to raise him blind. Like, he's just in peak form, just in terms of just Mike Matusow mouthiness. He tells stories about how he got addicted to online poker, so his family had to take his computer away. Just all sorts of just crazy, crazy stuff that, yeah, I agree. This episode 1 is the weakest of all three of them, but it's just Matusow just makes this so entertaining that it is still worth watching.
And that we got a smidget of what can only be described as sort of chip stacking etiquette gate for Hellmuth, because he's chip leader, so he has the table covered, but he kind of has his like $100 chips and $500 chips like intermixed in these like messy, dirty stacks. And it's not like he's it's just kind of weird that he did that. He's supposed to be Hellmuth, and he'll do more of these odd things in the final table part of the tournament. But I just don't know why he would do that. It just doesn't make sense to me. And Matusow does call him out for it too.
Yeah, they set up, I guess, again, I'd only seen the argument between Daneman and Phil. I hadn't actually seen the full coverage of it. So it was nice that they kind of set it up with a couple of Matusow's comments, plenty of shots of Phil's stack. So again, you kind of do agree with Steve when we get there, but we'll talk in more detail when we get there. But I do like that they were able to set it up a bit better, that doesn't just come out of nowhere.
Mm-hmm. And as the bust sets are dying down, we're putting down to the final table, which is the money bubble. And Doyle and Johnny Chan, both as Pepsi sponsorship players, make it fairly close. I think 13th and 10th is what they finished. So getting pretty closer, but they never really had too many chips at any one point in time. So they bust out, and we have our final table of 9, which is actually a fairly balanced 9. We have a couple of names from '05 relevancy. We have a few. Obviously we have a sponsorship player of Hellmuth, and we have a couple of the players that we get to know a bit about as the action continues.
Yeah, I mean, I really do. Again, obviously, this is kind of luck based, but I do like that there is a good mixture of people. You have Hoyt Corkins, who is wearing a pair of earplugs, and kind of to me, like, how there's a comic duo, there's the straight man, there's the foil. The foil is the super goofy one, whereas the straight man's the straight one. Like, Hoyt Corkins is the straight man of this entire tournament. Like, he's got his earplugs in, he plays a very fairly aggressive game, lots of shoves, trying to sort of get people off their game, which ticks Hellmuth off. But he's also just like, he seems like a nice guy. He's very reticent. So to have him juxtaposed with Phil Hellmuth and Mike Matusow, who are the two chip leaders as we go into the final table, and even though there's 7 other people at the table, they're like just jousting with each other. They're verbally sparring all through. And then there's Hoyt Corkins, who's just playing very good poker, keeping to himself. It's just so funny to me. It's like what makes Hellmuth and Matusow so much funnier is that Hoyt Corkins is there to juxtapose them and bounce off of them. Like, that's just hilarious.
And that will definitely amplify as the table shrinks and it's more and more of them involved in the action. Episode 2 here is a little bit longer. Actually, they made it 50 minutes long. It's a little bit longer than the average episode typically. And I gotta say, this is probably one of the strongest episodes of the bunch we're discussing today. And it just kind of speaks to like an '05. There was just some magic to '05 where it was just one of the best, broadcasts of poker really of all time. I mean, this is a part of that. And things got off to a very funny, comic heavy start when Denneman gives a couple of gifts out to the table to Matusow and Hellmuth. For Matusow, it's a copy of his sort of mini globe card protector. And then I got the whole world in my hands. Matusow gets a little number. And then Hellmuth gets, of course, fittingly, a stuffed donkey.
It's a great moment, and I love that Phil just rolls with it. He doesn't get too offended or anything. It's again, there was a spirit of having fun here that just isn't present in other events, which I really like.
Yeah, and then Hoyt Corkins just somehow manages to get queens after queens and somehow manages to beat, superior hands with them. And again, this speaks to a final table that had, as many, if not more, bad beats than any final table you'll probably ever find on poker television history.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these hands are just really exciting. I mean, Matisow's just playing crazy. Like he'll say he'll call in the dark and call with random hands. Hellmuth and him are jousting. Just a lot of like really fun stuff. People aren't just playing premium hands; they're playing hands like 9-5 suited. It's nice to see again that there's just a bunch of action here, a bunch of different styles of play instead of just premium hands or just really tight play, which I like.
Yeah, these first couple of pay jumps weren't very substantial, and in fact, they were actually pay jumps of $0 for a couple bust outs. Like ninth place was 25K, eighth place was 25K. So again, I guess if you're an amateur playing at a table and there's a pay jump of $0, I guess it kind of takes some pressure off of you a little bit in a weird way because you're not risking any money. Of course, obviously finishing eighth is more fun than finishing in ninth either way. But but I should speak again to these bad beats. I mean, I remember before we even rewatched this, I was like, I recall there being at least 5, 6, 7 bad beats in this foul table. And if you love bad beats or back and forth hands, this is the one for you right here, this episode. And that happens of Hoyt Corkins double to Brandon Adams of queens against aces, and then Hoyt gets queens again against tens, 10 on the turn, queen in the river. I mean, just some bizarre runouts that are pretty awesome. And after the first few bust outs, that's when some more great Hellmuth drama takes place, which includes sort of this like internal mind block that Hellmuth has with Hoyt that you just can never beat him in a hand ever. And that includes after he folds and declares war on him and on Mike.
Yeah, there's this whole motif of just declaring war on people. Hellmuth is declaring war on Mike Matusow. Mike Matusow's declaring war on Phil Hellmuth. Hellmuth is declaring war on Hoyt Corkins, who again has earplugs in and can't hear any of this. So it's just, completely stoic. Matusow says they're no longer at war, and then Hellmuth says they are. Just again, just so much banter, just so much back and forth, which is it's just so enjoyable to see.
Yeah, and Hellmuth began as the chip leader at the final table, and he doesn't really take any big shots per se. He just kind of doesn't win too many hands to sort of maintain that lead. And so, as they're down to like 5-handed at one point after Lang does this bizarre blub of 9-5 high into aces, going on 6th place. Hellmuth wins a hand by forcing out Matusow with a relatively like a not a bluff, but he thought he was bluffing. He had the best hand. And then Steve Denneman calls him out for not having his chip stacked because he had sort of messed him up earlier to make it look bigger, I guess, or something. I don't know. And Hellmuth takes offense because the chips he doesn't stack are like just the yellow and black chips are worth 1,000. And he complains, oh, well, we're just ending with them, so who cares? It's just the small denomination chips. But then they only have the blue 5K and then only a few of those, and then a lot of the yellow ones. So really, that's the majority of his stack anyway. So it's pretty important to know how much he has. And because Hellmuth's trying to make a fuss about it, so that's the ruling. Every director's going to say that. You think, Matt? That's when sort of a fuse hits in Matt Denneman's head, and that's when things get really extreme.
Yeah, I mean, we all sort of know these lines. I mean, everybody's seen these clips. No one should buy your books or CDs because you're a punk, you're not a professional, you're extremely rude. Is it a little excessive to call Phil a punk? Yes. But as Ben just mentioned, I mean, Phil had been doing this throughout the day for really no good reason. I mean, he should just be stacking his chips normally like everybody else. And all things considered, like a punk is not to me that bad of an insult. Like I'm reminded of Cliff Josephy calling Kasuf a clown. Like I feel like clown is a harsher insult than a punk. It's like one peg above calling somebody rude, which is what Danneman did. So like Hellmuth immediately turns to the floor. People are like, isn't he going to get a penalty for this? No, he's not going to get a penalty for this, which is rich coming from Phil Hellmuth, right? I mean, obviously 3 years later, he's going to call somebody an idiot a bunch of times and not get a penalty for that. So Yeah, I mean, yeah, Taneman maybe a little bit too over the top. Shouldn't have raised his voice at the guy, but I don't think he acted super out of line. It wasn't like Daneman pushed Hellmuth or anything, and they shook hands afterward. They're showed shaking hands
Multiple
twice,
times.
actually. Yeah, and Daneman still doesn't really like apologize for what he said. He's still like, "Well, Hellmuth, you should be stacking your chips. I'm an amateur." And unfortunately, Daneman busts shortly afterwards, so this doesn't really simmer for a long period of time. But it is definitely a pretty dramatic moment, especially because Daneman had that reputation of I'm the super nice guy. I gave you a gift earlier. It's very interesting.
Yeah, it's again definitely one of the highlights of this entire tournament. And
Hmm.
again, the couple hands after that are pretty intense. Matusow double through Daneman, the guy who ruined his life, and then Daneman busted Matusow afterwards. So, and in between, obviously, we have some more moments, and we get the classic "I can dodge bullets" BB moment, which is a great one. Um, I thought that having Matusow versus Shakan again, just not one moment. I feel like they should have picked one particular hand. Like there's a couple they could have picked really, but they didn't pick one of them. And then
Hmm.
we have again a pretty lame moment, number six, the top pair, which is like couples or families doing well, which is again not a moment, it's more of a trend. And again, it is consistent with the year prior with some of the number top 10 moments, but it wasn't really a moment for me either.
Yeah, I mean, just going back to the Matusow Shakan segment for a hand, you've talked about this before. There's this weird clip of like Matusow and Shakan like pushing each other.
Yeah.
Like it's like 2 seconds long. It happens very quickly. Blink if you'll miss it. Like, does anybody have that footage? Like, what's the context of that? Did they actually like get into a fight with each other? I feel like we would have heard about it already if they, got
Yeah.
into a fight. I mean, yeah, those two moments are pretty weak. Moment number five was a hand during one of the other bracelet events, Ace King versus Jacks versus tens, where it was set versus straight draw on the flop. That was kind of neat. And then number four was William Rockwell making it to day two. It's
We
it's a
lame.
little heartwarming. It's
I
it's
thought it was
kind
kind
of
of
lame,
lame though.
but
It's kind of lame.
making it to day two isn't a super big accomplishment. Let's just, kind of be
If
honest.
he
But
had cashed, okay, I'll give him that. But he made it to day
yeah,
two in the biggest main event of all time, and he had like four chips. I mean, come on. If Cody
that's
Daniels can cash in back-to-back main events, then we can expect better from William Rockwell.
that's fair enough.
And also in that number five moment, the hand, Weber Kang, who made a deep run in the 2012 main event. It's kind of funny to see his name pop up in
Oh
that
yeah.
bit there because I didn't know I had forgotten that he was in that hand. I guess I didn't realize it. So, the guy that Merchant bust on day six, I believe what it was. So that was kind of cool to
Mhm.
see his name pop up there. Otherwise, though, we end this episode with three players remaining: Hoyt, Matusow, and Hellmuth. And again, it's a great trio. You mentioned sort of the comedic sort of formula of the three of them, and again, it's a very entertaining and very exciting three-way action. And maybe less so heads up, but nonetheless, a very good third-parter coming our way with this final table.
Yeah, I mean, just so many great lines in episodes two and three. It's hard to pick what my favorite Matusow line is. It might be toward the end of episode two when Matusow doubles up through Daneman and he says, "It's been 20 years since I hit a card like that, doubling up on the river, and I've only been playing for 19." Like that's just so witty. I just love that so much. But yeah, as I mentioned, like the weird war dynamic between them declaring war on each other is also just so funny. And just the little things too. Like there's a lot of just little lines that I like where Matusow just peppers Hellmuth. Like at one point, like Hellmuth jumps out of his chair in episode three, and Matusow just says, "Watch the chair." I don't know why that's so funny to me, but just watch the chair is just hilarious.
Yeah, and then again, so again, the Matusow Hellmuth, two-man show is a lot of entertaining, but Hoyt gets more into that sort of vibe for the final three-handed play, of course. Right off the bat, Hellmuth reverses straight to counterfeit Matusow's straight and wins a big pot, and then Matusow comes this close to a Mike Matusow blow up with 8-3, but Hellmuth isn't quite able to pull a trigger with ace-8 of all hands. He would have had him crushed and probably won the whole thing if he makes the call there.
Right.
And then again, Hellmuth again loses another hand to Matusow. Matusow was a flush, and so really just some great back and forth between these two guys playing. All the while, we get moment number three being Raymer's title defense, which I guess I'll give him that one because it was back-to-back main event deep runs, and unlike Bill Brunson's 53rd place, this is a much more impressive number to last, and so I'll give him that one. That wasn't too bad.
Yeah, number two was the old guard striking back. This is basically just
Lame.
everybody who's old winning a bracelet. Okay, that's nice. And then number one was just the main event that
It
there's
was
five.
kind of like the field being big and then Hashem winning. I wasn't really sure which one that was supposed to be. That again, that's a pretty weak ending to the moments again for this one. I liked some literally ones, but this was not how I wanted to end things. Um, Otherwise, there's again some pretty good some pretty good action with more play here. Hellmuth makes a great king high hero call against Hoyt that worked very well, and then Hoyt doubles with aces against Hellmuth's ace queen, and Hellmuth declares 5-tuple war. Again, some good stuff, and then once again Hellmuth, because he can't beat Hoyt, he just keeps raining. I just can't beat Hoyt. Oh, so gross.
Yeah, and once Hellmuth starts to get kind of short stacked, he starts sort of like playing up the crowd. He's like, "I'm not giving up. I'm gonna win. I'm not giving up." Which is
Never ever, I never ever give up. And then his dad is actually in the audience, and so he's like trying to get him. Okay, okay, sit down and play, man. I told you. And that's just it's just great to have someone that Hellmuth absolutely cannot disrespect in the crowd to kind of trying to tell him to put a pipe in it.
yeah, I love that.
It's good. And Hellmuth does double up through Matusow with Jacks against King Jack. So again, it's a pretty funny all in. Matusow's like, King! He's really playing up to the camera. It's always fun. And then, of course, his dad says, I told you, sit down and play, man. And Hellmuth's still pretty short even after that double up, which means that he shoves 10-8 suited, much to his dad's discontent when Hoyt's in the big blind while Hellmuth's in the small blind. And Hellmuth actually gives some of the most coy, like nervous, like all-in talk I've maybe ever seen Hellmuth have ever. He says, if he has the king 3, I hope he calls. If he's got the king 8, I hope he doesn't call. Like he's almost giving when he has an 8 in his hand. So it's pretty funny.
That is very strange. And, Corkins does make the call and Hellmuth busts. And Hellmuth, I mean, just his reaction afterward is just unbelievable. Like, this might be like the most underrated Phil Hellmuth moment of all time. He's out in the hallway. He's talking to his dad, and a woman comes up to him to get his autograph. And he's like holding the paper and the pen. And there's the woman just standing there. And he's still talking to his dad about the hand that was going on. Then he just signs it and hands it over and just keeps complaining. Like, doesn't even stop mid thought, doesn't spend a moment with the fan, doesn't ask her what her name is or anything, try to give her a moment. Like he's just so caught up in his bust out that he has to keep going. Like I just couldn't believe that moment. It's so funny.
Yeah, Hellmuth also does a little mini rant to Hoyt and Matusow after he busts. He's like, you guys are all in, bust, raise, double, double. Like he's like complaining about the flow of the table, even though, there was so many like crazy all-ins and like miracle rivers and come from behinds but Hellmuth wasn't really actually involved in really too many of those hands. Actually, for the most part, he was kind of separate from those. So I guess maybe he's upset that those, if just 1 or 2 of those hands goes the other way, the table's done a lot sooner, and he might pull it off. But either way, it's and then Matusow tries to tell him, like, man, when you lose and shake someone's hand, just say thanks, you played great, and walk away. Like he just it's not in his blood to talk like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny to see Matusow, telling somebody about etiquette. Yeah, I mean, obviously Matusow is bantering with Hellmuth, and he often likes to say, I only really banter with, people who know me well, I never banter with anybody who, doesn't know me very well. Yeah, it's just rich to see him talking about, etiquette with Hellmuth.
Yeah. And the sponsor, like the main sponsor for this Tournament of Champions was this drink. I think that's a drink, right? Sobe Adrenaline Rush, which I've never heard of. What?
I think so.
I've never heard of it.
Yeah.
Which is funny because you'd think that I'd seen a store or a different ad for it or something, or have drank it at some point. I've had a Gatorade, I've had Powerade. I think it's probably in that genre of drink, probably. I know the brand Sobe. I've just never heard of Adrenaline Rush. And again, it's such an obscure drink. It reminded me of an interview with Matusow and DeGrano on Pocket Jacks on YouTube, where D-Neg says they can't even get a beer sponsor for for Let's the Poker, and this again they have these obscure, bizarre companies that are not like mainstream, because I guess mainstream companies and poker don't mix, I guess, when it comes to the corporate structuring of what's appropriate or not to sponsor. So again, I've never heard of it, and it was again the sponsor for the '06 TOC as well.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird sponsorship. I mean, this is again kind of a weird era in terms of sponsorships. Training websites and things weren't really on their feet yet, so they kind of just had to be like, all right, beer, all right, deodorant, which is just kind of strange.
Yeah, but even though the moments were a bit of a letdown for the bitch, I thought that it was a very fun fallow table. The part 1 before the fallow table maybe not as great, but the fallow table itself definitely up there for me for my favorite fallow tables of all time.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't really talk about this. I mean, heads up is only one hand, which is kind of unfortunate. They have a little bit of a segment, it's Matusow versus Corkins who's going to win, then it's one hand. But it is kind of nice to see Matusow being emotional afterward. He clearly appreciates it. And then when the episode ends with another sort of recap montage with that song I mentioned that I kind of like, which again isn't super necessary, but I think it's fine. There's no problem with it. You want to again have a season finale and celebrate everybody who's done stuff. Yeah, I mean, this is totally enjoyable. As the part one's not as strong, but parts two and three are really strong, and just so many seminal Hellmuth and Matusow moments here.
Yeah, and besides a few obscure events, we really don't get to see too many times to see this much shorthanded play in the sort of classic era main event or bracelet event
Mhm.
broadcast. So it's nice to have that here for the '05 TOC. Moving on to the kind of bizarrely structured '06 TOC, where they
Yeah,
kind of repeat the same field to a certain degree. It was only 27 players, but once again, they repeat the '05 final table for some reason and the
yeah,
'05 circuit winners. And then this time seven sponsor exemptions. So kind of weird. It's kind of this weird hybrid of '04 and '05 together. But I'm just it was played in June of '06. So this is before the main event would have taken place. But you just thought, why wouldn't they have done this in the fall of '06, like after Jamie Gold's win? I mean, they wouldn't have known it would have been Jamie Gold, but I'm just surprised they sort of repeated so many of the same faces.
yeah. I mean, this was sort of more of a start of the season event, which I think is kind of strange. I mean, I think you would want to have just Tournament of Champions, have bracelet winners, and have circuit event winners. You want to have this at the end of the WSOP as a sort of like last event. Let's have all the bracelet winners from the WSOP come in here, and this would be like a true all-star game. Yeah, it's just kind of weird that they would change the rules like that.
Yeah, and again, $2 million was the prize pool. $1 million was for first, and again, the pay jump's pretty much the same for the final table. Again, 9 were paid, and again, it's a free roll, so again, it's free money, so it's hard to be too much of a if you're playing it, too hard to complain too much about it. But nonetheless, I'm just surprised that they didn't, be consistent year to year, so to speak.
Hmm.
But this final table is broken into 2 episodes, and we actually begin with the final 10 down. So instead of the final 9, we actually have the bubble playing down to the pay structure, and with the table beginning, Andy Black, kind of reminiscent of '05's final table, a big chip leader of 1 million chips, and then we have a fair variety of players that we know from. I mean, all a few that we don't know, but again, kind of cool that we have that consistency.
Yeah, as I mentioned, it's nice to have a mixture of players so that you can see some new faces and some old faces. We have Daniel Bergsdorf, who's kind of a new face and an old face simultaneously. He's third in chips to start the episode, so you think he's going to do really well, and then he goes out ninth with kings against queen 10 of all hands. So,
Yes. And
oops.
ironically, this is kind of the first time maybe in not main event, in WSP history, but Massa is kind of receiving the business all
Yeah.
episode long and not really giving it out so much. It's pretty unique because usually he just kind of sits there and takes it from Negreanu and maybe Sexton a bit, but it was kind of weird to see a new side of Mike. I guess maybe his two $1 million scores the year prior and having lost it, maybe he was changing his attitude a bit. Maybe it would lead up to his '05, '08 power of positive thinking, sort of not being so verbose and negative all the time. Otherwise, yeah, Mike Sexton, the late Mike Sexton, also prominent in this final table. Chris Ferguson, who this is again before any controversy related to him would have taken place. So this is another spot for him to be in the spotlight. And then a couple players that we just don't really know. We have Dickin, we have Ham, and Reslock, who we don't know. It's not which is I think it's totally fine. But the problem is that they don't last too long, and they really get almost no screen time besides their bust out hands.
Yeah, I mean, the emphasis on this is definitely on Daniel Negreanu and Matusow, who are bantering with each other more amicably than Matusow bantered with Phil Hellmuth. Sexton, spoiler alert, he wins the whole thing. Kind of gets more attention as time goes on, and then yeah, these guys get a little bit of attention, but really, episode one kind of tries to have the Andy Black blow up be a thing, given how he performed in the main event, which works to a certain extent. I didn't actually know that this was how his Tournament of Champions went. And, for most of the episode, he's toward the top of the chip stack, if not the top dog. So it does kind of, it is a surprise to see him go the way he goes. But yeah, like trying to make the Andy Black blow up a thing is a little weird. Like Matusow genuinely had a lot of blow ups, hence the Mac Matusow blow up being a thing. I mean, Andy Black only sort of screwed up twice, so I don't really feel like that's as much of a thing, even if
Oh,
they're in
it was
progress.
a pretty big script though. I mean, at
Yeah.
one point, Andy Black has ace king and goes all in against Negreanu who has kings, and Negreanu was second in chips, so it's really the only player that can put a big beat on him. And it was like I think like a 1.5 million chip pot, and the blinds are
Yeah.
still single digit thousand in size. So this is a huge swing of things, and Matt Black, of course, of all things, ends up busting in fifth place like he did in the '05 main event, which is still $100,000 for a free roll is still, cash money. But obviously, when you're looking for $1 million, it's a big letdown. And had he sort of, maybe just call with the ace king instead of re-raising, maybe he probably gets away from the hand and doesn't lose nearly as much.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm not trying to say that Andy Black didn't blow up here. I'm just saying like they tried to make like it's the Andy Black blow up like it was like a brand name type thing or something. Like he's gonna market it, put it on a t-shirt or something. It's like it only happened twice. And he took it, kind of well, I
Yeah.
think. I mean, he was clearly a little bummed out to lose. He has a little segment at the end, like it's the Andy Black blow up. Andy Black again is kind of an interesting character that he's kind of like Joe Hashem, and that he like straddles the line between like being a really cool guy and being like a really uncool guy. And it's just kind of interesting to see him bob and weave like that.
There was also a small moment I really kind of liked seeing where Matusow was unable to accept praise from Andy Black. Like Black kind of trying to say you play great, and Matusow just won't even take it. Like it was weird to see him behave like that. I wonder if just the psychology between the two of them was something different that we don't know about unspoken stuff. But
Yeah.
there's no top 10 moments in this trial table. Instead, we do have something that's kind of similar-ish in function, being another iteration of the flushies
Mhm.
for the nuts. And we have the best hugger. We have the worst song of the year, which I actually thought that was kind of funny for a lot of people's rap. That was pretty good that they had that. And then we had the best fight, which was Prahlad against Lissandro. But the weird thing is that the flushies is using content from the '06 season. And
Right.
yet this tournament was kind of made before the '06 season was finished. So again, it just speaks to this sort of bizarre so it's half a clip show, but also half not even before the full '06 game of events was done. So why couldn't they have run this, after the main event so they could have had, everything all in place in the right order?
Yeah, I mean, I always love the flushies, so I don't really have a problem with this as a whole. But yeah, you're right. It is kind of weird the use of footage. They also have a kind of funny segment with Chris Ferguson dancing, but also Mike Sexton dancing, and I kind of like the juxtaposition between the two. And then also, Chris Ferguson has this really interesting rail. He has all these people with Jesus saves shirts. Obviously, Chris Ferguson's known as Jesus. It's kind of funny to see that kind of blurring the line between religion and Chris Ferguson there.
Yeah. And so, ultimately, it is kind of an anti-black focused episode. He gets a lot of the bust outs, and he does bust out. So I like that he was kind of not who you would expect to be the main featured player when you have guys like Negreanu and Matusow and Mike Sexton at the table. And so I thought overall it was still a pretty good episode. It's just unfortunate that we didn't get to see more of the obscure players that we didn't know. But I guess that was probably on purpose.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so we have 4 left for the episode 2, the back half of this episode. And there's some pretty good viral-ish moments, hands with Negreanu, for example, and with Matusow for that matter, where Negreanu does one of his classic soul reads, but still calls it the worst hand moves, which I think was in some compilation a while ago that I saw, but I think it's now long gone. But it's kind of good to see that again. And again, Negreanu was the chip leader with 400 play beginning after that huge win he won off of Andy Black, and so he's actually not too involved in some of the following hands, but Reslok kind of just gives it all away to Sexton and goes out in 4th place. And then again, much like in '05, the 300 play is really quite solid as well.
Yeah, a lot of fun stuff three-handed because Daniel Negreanu, Mike Matusow, and Mike Sexton are just great players. I mean, probably the most viral hand will be when Mike Sexton managed to call a big bet with bottom pair, and Daniel Negreanu just rubs it in Mike Matusow's face, saying that you got pwned and you got spanked and all that. And Mike Matusow is at a loss for words. He actually has to take his glasses off and kind of just sits there forlorn for a while. Which is just again, it's just a great moment. It's fun. You really don't know how the hand's going to end, and then when it happens, there's it's kind of cathartic to see Mike get his comeuppance.
Yeah, and not to mention, Matusow has his brother in the stands cheering for him, kind of like how Hellmuth had his dad in '05. And so he's actually cut to a few number of times, but the number of cuts increases dramatically when Matusow goes all out of a 3-bet shove of ace-4, and it just keeps kind of his brother saying, "What a blow up! That was a blow up! That was an awful move." And again, a connected ace 3-handed is not the worst hand in the world, and also he was pretty short in chips. So I don't think it was the worst move in the world. I don't think it was a blow up per se. I don't think an ace 3-handed is ever a blow up really with that when it's a 3-bet shove.
Yeah, it's funny that you connect it to Hellmuth's dad being in the stand because Hellmuth's dad is also sort of instructing Hellmuth on how to play at the table, and so is Mike's brother. Like it's just kind of funny that parallel.
Yeah, absolutely. So Matusow does go out in 3rd place, leaving a fairly even chip distribution for heads up play, Negreanu against Sexton, and again, it was one of a few different heads ups where it just felt like to the players it was a marathon. It was dragging on. They were getting tired. It reminded me, I think it was like the '08 Europe main event final table where it dragged on for so long because they were so exhausted. And then with early action, Sexton actually rivers trips after Negreanu gets two pair, and so that flips things over a little bit. And then Negreanu makes a big bluff and wins the next hand after that. And so again, there was a fair amount of back and forth in the edit, considering we had a good third of the episode to show this heads up battle.
Yeah, and obviously we know that Sexton wins, but I don't think from the edit you would know that he did. There is a good sort of back and forth. Premium hands are being played. It's a pretty exciting heads up match, even if it's only a few hands. It is kind of nice, and they are bantering with each other. I mean, Sexton's not as talkative as Matusow is, but they're both trying to read each other's hands and saying like, "What did you have?" It's fun to watch.
Yeah, and so and then once again we have an end sort of montage with that song to cap things off. And again, this was kind of the swan song of the original iteration of the classic World Series poker coverage because '07 would change things up. And again, it was a pretty solid, pretty entertaining couple episodes. I like this one a lot. I think I'd put it, really, I don't really want to rank these tournament champions, but they're all pretty solid overall.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's not as good as '05 and '04. Like '04 just kind of has a little bit of a special, unique quality to it. But yeah, this is totally fine, and I would watch these episodes again. Really enjoyable.
Yeah, and then skipping, I guess, 4 years later until they had an entirely different idea for the same structure because again, it's only 27 players, but they had 521 past bracelet winners eligible, and it was decided by the fans voting online. So 20 would be decided by an online vote, and then there'd be two sponsor exemptions. That would be Andrew Barton and Elke Grospierre. And then they had 5 spots for the main event champion, in this case Joe Cata, the World Series Poker Europe champion, and then the last 3 previous TOC winners, that being Sexton, Duke, and Matusow.
Yeah, and then we go sort of right into the final table. There's unfortunately not too much in terms of the action that came before. And again, a pretty good mixture of players. You have Daniel Negreanu, Johnny Chan, Joe Hashem, Huck Seed, Howard Lederer, Barry Greenstein, Jennifer Harmon, TJ Cloutier, Eric Seidel, and Annie Duke. So yeah, I mean, a pretty good mixture. I think the average poker fan in 2010 would know who all these guys are. Maybe Seed's a little bit obscure. Maybe Cloutier is a little bit obscure. But again, it's a sort of good mixture of some really talkative people, some a little bit less talkative people, some aggressive players, some less aggressive players. So yeah, I mean, again, kind of lucked out here that you had this group of 10 people. Who knows if there were another 10 people, if this would be as exciting. But yeah, I mean, when I saw this final table, I'm like, okay, this is interesting. I'm looking forward to watching this.
Yeah, and I didn't know about this tournament vote. Back then I was not really into poker
Yeah.
at this time, but I would have probably voted for my usual favorites. Doyle Brunson, Hellmuth, Negreanu, which is it's fine. I obviously Negreanu did make the cut in this one, but I'm happy with who we got, and this is also kind of the last hurrah for a few of these players because of the swap from the classic main event era to the modern main event era. Like guys like obviously Lederer, Duke, and even Harmon to a lesser extent, kind of will not really be prominent in any future poker TV per se, both either because of not playing as much in those tournaments or also just because of controversies prompting them to not be in the public eye of poker. But and also even Greenstein to a lesser extent, we don't really see much nowadays either.
Yeah, I mean, quite a few of these people, yeah, it's sort of their last hurrah. But at the time, obviously, they were seen as top poker players. This was kind of like a dream team of poker, and there's this sort of like little comparison throughout between the dream team that won the Olympic gold in 1992, the basketball team. And it's kind of funny to see again, like Barry Greenstein, I don't really think is like a goofy player. So it's kind of just interesting to see, like right at the start of the episode, we have him like talking about the dream team, the basketball team, trying to compare everybody to it. Everybody seems in good spirits. Everybody's just kind of talking to each other. Like I said, some players are a little less talkative than others, Huckseed being one of them. But again, it's kind of nice to have them at the table. They have good energy, and everybody just seems to be having fun here. This is an invitation only event. They're not staking too much, so they can just kind of have fun.
Yeah, and the only thing is that with the table being at 10 players, we do have once again kind of a bubble of sorts to resolve before people can relax a bit. And the prize pool is only $1 million now, with $500,000 being the first place prize. And again, it's a free roll, so it's not like there's no entitlement to as far as it should be $2 million in the prize pool. It's still a lot of free money for these players. This tournament began in June of 2010. and they played at the Rio actually this time in the Amazon room, and then they played the final table a week later after they made the final table. So again, these small little differences is poker still, but it's just kind of interesting to see how they would change their approach for each tournament year to year. And right off the bat here, Eric Seidel is short stacked, and not the bottom stack, but one of the short stacks, and he actually busts to Jen Harmon on the bubble in 10th place fairly early on. This is after Duke had shoved all in and doubled up through Hashem, and she had been the short stack when 10-handed play began.
Yeah, I mean, one other thing sort of about setting this up is that there really isn't sort of a series finale vibe to this. This is just, still more like sort of a television special than anything else. It's obviously not a bracelet event. A nice little trophy for the winner. That's about it. So yeah, I mean, there's a little bit less of that sort of series finale. We're going to look back and have fun at poker sort of spirit behind it. When I mean sort of there's a good spirit, it's really the people at the table. And also there's quite a big audience. Like they filmed this, on a set with, bleachers full of people watching. So that's, it's kind of nice to see a crowd in there. But yeah, there's a little bit less of a special essence in 2010 as there are in previous events. Still fine. We'll obviously go through these episodes. There's a little bit less of that sort of unique essence that there was in the last three.
And the 04 TOC had no audience. It was set in this dark, kind of gloomy room, and there was maybe less energy to it as a result of that. But 05, 06, and 2010 had people watching, no problem. So a little bit different vibe. But 2010 totally fine the vibe here. The actual poker action is a little bit slower pace of those knockouts early on. So we see a few more hands play out. And so there's a bit more of a narrative to each player's rise and fall. And that's pretty strong because we see, some pretty solid rises and falls, the rise of Johnny Chan, the fall of Dean Egg, the rise and fall of Johnny Duke. So those all had individual narratives within the action on the foul table. And that worked for me.
Yeah, I mean, there's also quite a bit of continuity with the previous Tournament of Champions. Daniel Negreanu talks a little bit about his heads up with Mike Sexton. We also get quite a lot of Lederer and Duke kind of talking about their relationship and also what their previous experiences together at the Tournament of Champions was like. So there is connective tissue. I mean, if you're watching all these Tournament of Champions in a row like Ben and I did, you can definitely sort of see through lines and little editing things, which are nice.
But perhaps the most bizarre part of this 2010 TOC is the pay jumps,
Yeah.
because from 4th through 9th, they're all paid 25K, which is essentially saying that, oh, you made an appearance fee for being on the final table. I mean, it was very strange. You'd think that there'd be some sort of anything different, $5,000 difference, something that would distinguish between 9th through 4th. And I know that they only have $1 million and they wanted to give half of that to first place, but you still could have had a little bit more variation in the price in the pay jumps.
Or, given the fourth place finisher a coupon to someplace or something. I don't know. I'm with you on there. I mean, yeah, obviously everybody here knows that this is just kind of a fun free roll tournament. But yeah, I mean, if you're trying to maneuver your stack, it doesn't really matter if you get fourth place or ninth place. It doesn't really affect the action too much. But I could easily see circumstances where it did, and it would make the event less exciting.
Yeah, and again, this is money. These are all, still some of the top players. I don't, maybe Cloutier's financial situation maybe is questionable to some, but everybody else, this is not like life-changing money for them. Maybe $500,000 for Huckseed, maybe, I don't know. But again, it was fine. There's no scared poker beyond on display here, is what I'm saying. Otherwise, the action is pretty good. We also get the recurrence of the wild card hand. We get one hand where we only see one player's whole cards, and in this case, Johnny Chan is the wild card hand, and he actually is able to get Negreanu to fold the worst hand, even though he was aggressive with his play. And Negreanu makes the right read while Norman the Booth makes the wrong read. So that was kind of a funny little juxtaposition there.
Yeah, it's always funny to see the wild card hand. In this version, in previous seasons, we would have 4 options on the screen, but in this time we don't have any options. So it's just sort of Norm out on his own doing this, and it's always just kind of funny. It's nice to play along.
Yeah, and again, I'd never seen this table before. This is the first time for me watching this. So again, I was not spoiled by the wild card hands for both of the episodes that had it. So that was kind of fun to play along with. Now I think I was right both times when I was watching too.
Oh, very nice. I wasn't, but
well, as far as like, call or fold, not like,
yeah.
bluff them out for raise, like as far as like the binary of one or two actions there. By episode's end, we're down to 6 players. Harmon busts in 7th place. So we're still only halfway through the 25K pay jump to this point. And with episode 2, again, we're covering quite a few blind levels. Johnny Chan was actually the chip leader with 6 left, and Huck was, he had a fairly quiet edit for the first majority of this table. He was only in like one hand in episode 1, and then he's actually pretty far in last place and during 300 play twice actually, and manages to make it spin it back up to take things down. And so but again, probably my top note point for this final table was Lana Norm referencing the TV show Tilt that we had our great podcast about a couple of years ago, or whatever it was, a year and a half ago, where we and they mentioned that both they and Negrano were in the show, and they mentioned it being canceled, which again reminds me of when they were referencing 2 Months to a Million. But either way, it was just really cool to have that name dropped in this episode.
Yeah, I put that in there. That was a highlight for sure. Yeah, another thing about I didn't know going into this who won the event or what the payouts were like. So when I saw Johnny Chan was at the top of the leaderboard, not only at the end of episode 1, but episode 2, and they also kind of gave him an edit. Like he really wants to win this one. They had a lot of segments. He has a lot of footage. I thought he was going to win this because he was getting like the winner's edit, to use a reality show term. So to see that the final 2 was actually Huckseed and Howard Lederer was kind of nice. Again, maybe I would have preferred Huxley having a bit more of a prominent edit in episode 1. Well, he's in there, he's in there every now and again. But, it's kind of a nice sort of curveball to be like, oh, yeah, he gets third. He winds up taking it down.
Yeah, there aren't really as many bits or interviews in these episodes as years past, but they did have, tail of the tape, and they even had like a big blinds remaining graphic, which is kind of weird to show in this kind of edit because it doesn't really matter too much in the grand scheme of things. And this was before the whole, big blinds remaining was like a mainstay in the on-screen graphics. So it was kind of interesting to see that here used, even if only briefly.
Right.
Otherwise, we see Daniel Grano go out in 6. Aces get cracked by Hashem's flop set. Then we see Barry Greenstein out. Joe Hashem goes out, and they even allude to sort of Hashem's attitude problems of years past briefly, and that was kind of cool to hear that, and someone else acknowledged it because we had mentioned how he was kind of like this hot cold year to year from 05 to 06 to 07, etc. So that was kind of cool. And then 300 play is again for some reason 300 play has just been really solid for these TOCs. So it was very good too.
Yeah, it's fun to watch again these 3 people just go at it. And again, like I mentioned, I really had no idea. I thought, okay, Chad's got this big lead, seed's down, so Chad's gonna win this one. So to just see all sorts of just crazy hands, and to see also Johnny Chan, who again, just being emotional, celebrating his wins. He clearly did want to win this, so it was fun to see that. Unfortunately, things just don't quite work out for him. Eventually, sort of chips down. And then heads up again is only a couple hands, but it was still kind of exciting to see how exactly it would go. Both of them seem, are kind of bantering with each other, and it was fun to watch.
Oh, and a note that I had from the 06 TOC was that Hellmuth got 26th place in it out of 27 players. That's just kind of funny to note that, by the way. And so again, I liked the this episode a lot. The heads up play was only 3 hands. Howard wins the first couple of hands, then Seed gets lucky to double up, and then wins it all from there. Norm. Actually, I also kind of like the Lana Norm chatter. That was pretty good. This episode, this entire, and that includes the tilt reference, of course. And so, I was again pretty happy with this one. It's not as flashy or as maybe viral as the last couple had moments from each of them to be that, but and again, it wasn't also trying to be like a finale or anything. So it was going for just kind of your typical, Pro Bowl All-Star game vibe.
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned at the start of this, it really has sort of an all-star vibe. Here are the 27 best players and you vote them in. I mean, voting them in is kind of an interesting feature. I'm not really sure how I feel about it because I think it denies the coverage opportunities to have some more obscure players like Daniel Bergsdorf or somebody who can feature and make a deep run. There was kind of an interesting moment where they talked about Jennifer Harmon kind of did a campaign so that she would get a bunch of votes. I thought that was kind of interesting. And it was also kind of sweet that after Huckseed won, he thanked everybody who voted for him. I thought that was nice as well. But yeah, I mean, I think this format is okay. I kind of prefer the format from 05 that just, if you won a bracelet, if you won a circuit event, you're in, and, a couple of sponsorships and you're in. I think that's more of a pure all-star event. But still, this is a totally satisfying couple of episodes. A little bit less special than the 04 to 06 run. Would have liked, maybe a little bit more goofiness in there. But yeah, overall very solid.
Yeah, and speaking to your structure preferences, 12 years later, as a bracelet event, number 89, we actually had a return to the Tournament of Champions, in which case Hundreds of players were eligible to play. They had the circuit winners, both live and online. You had bracelet winners of 2021, all available to play in this tournament. And so out of 569 qualifying players, 470 actually, played in this event, and playing for a free roll $1 million prize pool, which meant that 60 players cash. So the first prize was only a $250,000, but it is free money in the bracelet event. So that's pretty valuable still. And this was the final 7 onward, and kind of a abridged edit of the final table played in the PokerGo studio, or not studio, but in the casino. And so it was Lon and Dan Zach who was that year's player of the year in the booth. And so they kind of had a few details I kind of appreciated. And even though I don't think I really have ever heard of any of these players ever, and I haven't heard of them from them since, I thought it was actually not that bad, all things considered, all of the issues I've had with the main event coverage and whatnot, and from the CBS Sports Network. I thought this is not it's just pretty okay.
Yeah, it's okay. It's kind of the standard 2022 WSOP coverage in that there's no real segments. There were no interviews in this one, really just sort of hand after hand after hand. Dan Zach was totally fine as a commentator. I thought he was pretty good. Norm is always missed whenever he's not in these. But yeah, I mean, this was fine. I mean, I don't have a whole lot to say about it.
Mm,
Kolev was the only one that I remember. That's just because of the bucket on the head. I
right.
just found it distinct.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it was basically just kind of mostly all ins, with a couple of other hands mixed in there. There was one funny moment in Heads Up when the commentators are kind of talking about the two players, and they got interrupted by Calp having kings, and you could kind of tell like they thought that this would be the last hand, this is over, but then Garza had 7-5, so Garza just folds. Um, yeah, I mean, nothing super exciting, because again, it's mainly just kind of a shove compilation reel. The one thing I was ticked off about was Gregory Wish, who busted in 6th place. We don't see his hand, we just see him bust out.
They did it again. They did it once
Yeah,
again in 2022. They just keep doing that. It's the worst thing. I can't stand it. And I will always call them out for that.
yep.
I always will. The payouts for this final table were a bit better. We had actual pay jumps, first of all, and they did increase in size from spot to spot. And so I didn't have any issue with that at all. Obviously, it was a little strange to have a final table only had the final 7 onward. That was a little bit of a strange choice, but I guess to each their own. And the one detail I actually had no idea was the case, but that Dan Weinman, the year prior to his main event win, was actually like second in the player of year race, and he gets name
Oh
dropped
yeah.
a few times. I had no idea. I thought that the narrative was that he was kind of winding out of poker, but I guess it was only in that one year that he won it, because obviously if you're second in player of the year race, you're obviously pretty invested at that point.
Yeah, absolutely.
So good for him for being relevant the year before he wins it. I guess he kind of, paid his dues by that success there. And again, the action's fine. There's a few, things I noticed, big, like Buckethead Kolev had to fold some big hands correctly or lose with bucket pairs. But otherwise it was fine. And there was also one spot that was kind of strange. This guy accidentally survived a hand with 1 chip left.
Oh
And
yeah.
and then had he won the next hand where it was a small blind, he would have like 16 timed up from like 1 chip to 16 chips. So that could have been kind of funny if he had spun it up, but he didn't. But that was a little, again, the big blind ante playing and affecting the gameplay. It didn't happen once in the main event the last few years, but that was the one chance it could have maybe. But other than that, again, it was fine. I wasn't bored by it like it was in the main event that year or let down by it. It was just kind of we actually had forgotten to watch this one. We had to watch it, scramble to watch it right last minute because I didn't know it was recorded for TV or for PokerGo in this case. So that was kind of funny.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't advertise that they had any of these events that they cobbled together. So it'd be nice if they could just tell us, hey, we're going to release a tournament like this. Yeah, it's okay. I wouldn't mind seeing some of these other bracelet events just to kind of see what they could do with them. But it'd be nice if they added a little bit more effort, interviewed a couple of the guys, added a little bit more sort of fun moments, more of that taste in there.
Yeah. And so that kind of covers everything of the TOCs. Again, they changed the structure and the prize pool and the sample size of who can play in it. And I want to ask you, Sam, if you were gonna, twist things into your ideal TOC, what would be your structure and what would be your potential players that you'd have in it?
Well, like I said, I think it's nice to have like a series finale type feel to Tournament of Champions where you have all the bracelet winners and all the circuit winners. I'm also cool with having all the 9 final tables to the main event. I think that's kind of a nice little quirk to have. Um, Yeah, I mean, in terms of a structure, I mean, I would like to have, an actual payout structure. If you want to have $1 million up top, cool. And then second place is 500,000, and then third place is 250,000. However exactly you do it. I'm not quite sure how many players I would want to have paid, maybe the top 10%,
Mhm.
something like that. But yeah, like actually have serious money up for grabs. You can have a bracelet up for grabs too. I think that'd be cool. Just make it a little bit more competitive. I don't know how long the levels would be, like maybe an hour, maybe. I don't know, something like that. Something that, again, they're going to actually play serious poker. And then if I had a broadcast, I'd want to see a little bit of the early stages. You can focus on the final table. That's fine. You can have a couple episodes on the final table, but I'd like to see a little bit more of that early stage.
Yeah, again, I liked how they had that vote year one time, but again, at the same time, it becomes American Idol, not the best singer, just who gets the most votes, and so you don't want to have too much of that. And there are events that are kind of adjacent. You have like the main event champions bounty events, where if you're not going to main event champion, you get a bounty or something. Or there were like special non-bracelet events, like there's the casino event, there's the senior event, there's the main event, bracelet. There's some like championship-ish events mixed in there, so you really have to put your stamp on this structure for it to be the TOC, not just like some other event. So fair
Yeah, I
point.
mean, just take a structure and stick with it. I mean, I do hope they do this in future years. I think this is a fun event. It's kind of nice to have a poker all-stars event, but you have to just pick a structure and just stick with it and try to make it as competitive as possible. I mean, $500,000 or $250,000, obviously that's a lot of money to win, but I feel like for something like the Tournament of Champions, you need to have like $1 million up top to make it a little bit more special.
I agree. I agree. Besides that topic covered now, Sam, we are, I think, expecting to watch another poker movie
Yeah.
coming up. There's another film called Deal, which came out around the same time as Lucky You, starring Burt Reynolds. So I'll be excited to see if that movie can be maybe just slightly faster and less monotonous than Lucky You turned out to be. Fingers crossed, but I don't have high expectations there. And then we also stumbled upon on PokerGo this obscure event called like the Poker Doubles Championship, where it's like this like tournament structure where players are playing a team of two, but they swap whose action it is, like mid hand, like flop, pre-flop, flop, turn river. So that could be really messed up and maybe lead to some very bizarre poker, yin and yang between teammates. So I'll be excited to maybe see if that's worth watching too.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen Deal, but I've heard of it, so I know a few little details about it, but I don't know everything. Yeah, this poker doubles event I think is just strange. To switch off mid hand, I think is just very odd because in the tag team event in the WSOP, they've established you cannot switch off mid hand. After a hand, yes. In the middle of a level, yes, but you can't switch off in the middle of a hand, which I think it's just. I mean, I'm just curious to see how exactly it'll be.
Yeah, so we'll check it out. We'll see. Maybe we'll review it. We might not. We'll find out. And otherwise, guys, if you have any ideas, any things, any opinions you want to share about poker TV, about our discussion today, anything, let us know in the comment section. If you want to be our special guest, you want to suggest any future content that we can review, let us know in the comments. We've had some great interviews over the years, and we want to continue finding great new players to discuss poker with.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of poker news, I mean, King's Casino just sort of had the World Series of Poker Europe event. Obviously, that's just kind of wrapped up. Probably the big headline is Martin Cabral winning his third bracelet. Speaking of poker villains and talkative people, I like Martin Cabral. I managed to see, some of his win. He's just a funny guy, and it's nice that again we have like a Matusow type person who's doing pretty well, acquitting himself rather nicely, and it'd be hilarious to see him make a deep run in the main event. So hopefully, Martin Cabral can take his money and head to Vegas.
Yeah, and I think there was also a sort of a Twitter battle of sorts where Bryn Kenny was sort of downplaying Hellmuth's poker acumen and his achievements. And I did respond to Hellmuth's response to Bryn Kenny, and he did like my tweet, so that was pretty cool. So again, it's kind of funny how Twitter is kind of the great equalizer. I can, you could be seen by your poker idol or favorite players and be a part of that conversation. That's kind of cool. And again, I'll continue to try to have those little moments here and there. That's always fun.
Yeah, Hellmuth, if you want to be on the podcast, just let us know. We'll set it all up. We're happy to just let the cameras roll. You can just talk about whatever you want. Just feel free to talk to us.
Exactly. And until next time, guys, enjoy your poker, enjoy your TV, enjoy your poker on TV.
Make sure to stack your chips properly.
Bye, guys.
Bye.